Hello and welcome back to our next discussion of child development research. Today we're going to be looking at a question that many therapists are interested in and pertains to attachment. Hopefully many others will be interested in it as well. How stable is one's attachment style over time? And in order to try and answer this question, we're going to take a look at a 2013 meta-analysis by Dr. Martin Pinquart, I hope I'm saying his name right, from a university in Marburg, Germany. He and his colleagues looked at 127 longitudinal studies. So longitudinal means that the studies were conducted over time. And what sets them apart, perhaps, is that the first measurement of attachment always happened with somebody who was younger than 19. So we've got at least one child measure or adolescent measure of attachment in these studies. And of course, they are basically trying to assess the correlation or the connection, if you will, between attachment styles over time, looking at factors that affect how stable the attachment style is. And so basically we're going to take a look excuse me, at correlations between what we call T1 and T2, in other words, time 1 and time 2, the first time attachment was measured, and a second time later on down the road. All right, so what did they find? Well, perhaps surprisingly, the overall average correlation among all of these 127 studies was 0.39. That might be surprising to some because, as you may know, there is older research out there, individual studies that show correlations that are much higher. But of course, there are also some that show correlations that are lower, and so the average correlation they found is a correlation that we'd consider to be a moderate one, but not particularly outstanding, nothing that screams, oh my goodness, once you set your attachment style, it's yours for life. Okay, they did find that there were some factors that seemed to alter that average correlation. The highest correlations they found were in samples where the age at the first measurement of attachment was at least 6 years of age. And also, if attachment was assessed with what we call representational measures at both time 1 and time 2. By representational measures, we mean not looking at behavior so much, but asking questions, getting verbal answers to try and tap into how a person is thinking about themselves, their relationships, and themselves in those relationships. So kind of more of a cognitive measure. And I suppose it makes sense that these groups, which probably overlap to some extent, right? I mean, once a child is in their preschool years, you can start talking with them about relationships rather than just observing their behavior. So these two bullet points overlap to some extent. I suppose this makes some sense because of the plasticity or flexibility of the nervous system over those first few years of life, that a child's attachment, will be reacting to its environment as the nervous system is becoming more and more set, I guess you might say. A factor that reduced the stability, and this is something that some of you may know because it's a finding that showed up in many studies, is being in a high-risk sample. Okay, the correlations were much lower for high-risk samples than low-risk samples, and high-risk people, children, seem particularly prone to move from a secure attachment at time 1 to an insecure attachment at time 2, perhaps reflecting, of course, the chaos that almost by definition high-risk kids are exposed to. Interestingly, this high-risk risk for instability is applied only or found only among those who are at high social risk, perhaps because of abuse, divorce, poverty, what have you. It did not apply to those who are at high risk because of illness, physical illness issues. Children who were high risk because of biological factors, illness factors, did not show any less stability than the low risk samples. Okay, and then finally, and perhaps interestingly, the sex of the parent, whether a child was attaching to a mother or father, whether they had that information about mom or dad, or whether the child was a boy or a girl, didn't seem to make any difference. So I guess the upshot of this is that, especially in those first few years of life, it seems that attachment is fairly malleable, and over long periods of time, even for older folks, it is somewhat malleable, at least. And I think next time I'll probably talk a little bit about meta-analyses that look at deliberate attempts to improve attachment style. So tune back in a couple of weeks for that. Thanks very much. We'll see you again sometime soon. Bye-bye.